Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Thank you guys for being a part of College Knowledge. As you know, it's part of our mission to help you guys. So please send any questions you have to us at info@collegeknowledge.net. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to College Knowledge. I'm your host, Dave Kozak, alongside my co-host, Mr. Joe Kerins.
Dave, did you know that there are colleges out there that offer a course on how to survive the zombie apocalypse?
I did not, Joe.
Yeah, I was looking into it. Michigan State offered one. And it actually was pretty interesting because it went about like catastrophic events and human elements and the mindset and how things change. And then recently I also saw there's one at East Tennessee State University that has a class.
Well, I'm sure they're designed to make you think, but
I think that is the general idea. But, you know, well, just did you know?
I did not know.
I did.
Well, now we know. All right. So today, everyone, we're very pleased and honored to have the Pfizer Pratt University professor of political science at Duke University, Mr. John Aldrich, who specializes in American politics and behavior, formal theory, and methodology. And first of all, John, welcome to the show. I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation. You are in the middle of a very interesting time to be teaching political science from my perspective. Tell us a little bit about your journey to get where you are, schools you attended, and how you kind of matriculated to what is an excellent institution in a very critical time in political science.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I should say at the very beginning that while my first teaching job was at Michigan State University, I did not teach about the zombie apocalypse.
That was not your subject.
Although it might have been slightly livelier than what I do teach about. So I am the product of a small liberal arts college, Allegheny College in Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah,
and that's really relevant because it shaped how I thought about knowledge, academia. I wanted to be like my professors there because it was such a wonderful institution. And that's kept me interested in, all the way through in engaging undergraduates in the entire process that I go through as a research professor as well as a teaching professor. So that's one. Then I went to the University of Rochester to get my graduate degrees. And that was interesting because it was a brand new PhD program, sort of a post-war baby boom consequence of expansion I'm in the first year of the post-war baby boom. And we, made the university get larger and larger because there were more and more of us coming.
Yeah.
And so it was a brand new program and it involved that formal theory methodology stuff, which we don't really need to talk about.
Yeah, we'll leave that alone.
Although it's come back in a way to be much more important for our undergraduates. The way Duke sets up its undergraduate major is it has different focuses. So it has an American politics focus, but it has a data science focus also, big data and that sort of thing, and how to analyze it. So it's an increasingly important part of undergraduate curricula and learning in the social sciences as well as the STEM, the natural sciences.
Good stuff.
So I started off My first 7 years were at Michigan State University.
Okay.
And so I had the experience of a large land grant university. I then went to the University of Minnesota, which was, of course, another such one. And it was different from Michigan State, primarily because there wasn't the competition between the University of Michigan and Michigan State to figure out how, what their individual roles were in the state, whereas University of Minnesota was the dominant one. So that was a slightly different experience. But then coming to Duke University, long time ago in the late 1980s, is an entirely different experience of a private universities. Over the course of my time in academia, the sort of flagship universities of the United States have focused more and more on places like Duke and Stanford, as well as the Ivy League schools. And the Big Ten, which when I taught in the Big Ten, very many of them were really very important high-level academic institutions. The society has not supported those as broadly as they used to, and so smaller private universities that are expensive have grown up to take their place.
Money talks in all facets, right?
Yes. Yes.
And there's if we're talking about the history of it, right? When you have a select group of graduates that create wealth and donate wealth and create endowments, and you have the power to expand and grow, and so there's a real renaissance of higher ed that it wasn't necessarily supported by the states or the federal government. It was now private money that was bringing to the table, and you see the expansion of the Ivies, which have always been around, but Duke, even the schools like Vanderbilt, and you start seeing these institutions, they gain wealth, they gain notoriety, they gain quality professors. They steal people like you from the large land grant schools and are able to create and customize a staff. And so, love it. And so I think the first question I have is, how has political science changed since you sort of started at Michigan State to today? And it's a very sensitive subject for people. Politics in general is when I was growing up, I was always told, you don't talk about religion and politics. And now if you do, or if you don't, it seems like people are all tribed out now. They want to sit with their like-minded individuals, and we're more polar than ever. So walk us through the progression of politics in that regard, or political science.
Right. I should say that in the research triangle area where I am, there are three things you don't talk about: religion, politics, and basketball. just saying.
That's perfect.
So when in the early part of my career, the Michigan State, Minnesota period, this was a period when I would regularly vote for some Republicans and some Democrats, and very many people would. It was very common. Both parties had attractive, strong candidates who stood for, trying to do good in politics. And that had a consequence for the colleges and universities too, because for times it seemed like it was a race between the Republicans and the Democrats as to who would support higher education more. And up through the time I came here, which would have been the late 80s, early 90s, the Republicans tended to focus more on getting higher education support, and the Democrats more on K-12. And it was just sort of a balancing between this, and they would come together. This was particularly true in Minnesota at the time. I can point to that one pretty clearly, because there were sort of unconventional parties It was the DFL, the Democrat Farm Labor Party, which had emerged in the 1940s as a coalition of what had been a failed Democratic Party in the state, then a farmer and labor party that put together the laborers from the Iron Range of with the farmers and the progressive farmers. And Hubert Humphrey actually put this coalition together. At the same time, the Republicans changed their name to the Independent Republicans, the IR party, to emphasize that they were not slaves beholding to the national party, but were their own entity. Mm-hmm. So that was, and so they often had a lot of cross-fertilization and so forth. And that's essentially gone. One of the things I do when I teach about elections, political parties, Congress, those sorts of things, is just show the evidence about especially in Congress, the ending of the middle. That it used to be there were a fair number of moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans who overlapped and agreed on a lot of different things.
Sure.
Now there's the most moderate. There was until the end of this Congress, Joe Manchin as the conservative Democrat. Why didn't he become a Republican? Because a Republican, even the most liberal Republican, is typically so far from where even somebody like Joe Manchin stands that there's relatively little they can come in contact with. So this division echoes throughout our society from Washington through DFL land, farmers and laborers, but also at higher education. And we can't ignore the fact that we are embedded in our society. So
I guess that leads me to a question, and we'll get to we are going to ask some questions that families are going to want to understand here. But I'm just a sponge for this stuff. How do we get back to where there's moderates on both sides that are willing to talk and communicate and get problems solved? It seems like we're on a I don't know, 10, 12, 15 year run of drawing the line in the sand and very aggressive, bipartisan products.
Yes. So the best hope, as far as I can tell, and it's only a hope. It's not it's going to very likely to happen, but it's at least a chance, is to reflect back on the last time we were as divided politically, which was at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, the so-called progressive period, where the South, which was the principal base of the Democratic Party, was establishing Jim Crow system and let it be very far from the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that Republicans were relatively small but successful majority party at this point. Mm-hmm. And trying to reflect the diversity of half the nation was very difficult, especially as we had a dramatic transformation of our economy. That is to say, the Industrial Revolution was taking shape. Mm-hmm. They couldn't keep their half of the world together, and they split, and then they split in Congress, and there was a revolt against their Speaker of the House. Does that sound at all familiar? Uncle Joe Cannon, as he was sometimes affectionately known, not often affectionately, but sometimes known, and that divided the party, and the progressive Republicans, who were typically from Western states, found they had, enough in common with enough Democrats that they could work together inside Congress. Now, are we in the same position? A dramatic transformation of our economy, a whole bunch of new strains within both parties, and did we see that in both parties having difficulty keeping theirs together. The question is what happens when they split. Right now, we have a position where the more extreme Republicans in the House are handicapping their own party from achieving very much by insisting that any bill that comes out has the support of 218, well, it happens to be 217, but a majority of Republicans now before it can go to the floor. So they don't need any Democrats. If they continue to fail on that, and there's a reaction, as perhaps there could be, there's a reasonable chance that the Republicans could, in the Congress, the House could face a 2024 problem and lose their majority status. Well, they've done this back and forth between Republicans and Democrats now, but if they continue to lose, and especially if it were to turn out by 2026, 2028, that there's a Democratic majority, then the Republicans would feel the pressure to reform their own party to be able to appeal to something that looks like a majority instead of the 40% that the parties now seem to be willing to appeal to 40% of the electorate each, have these close elections and fight over the 20% who could go either way.
So we've sort of, from a non-educated standpoint on the subject, and what I can intake is what I know. This has been going on, this back and forth, and majority and minority, and majority and this agenda goes when this is the majority, and this agenda goes. But the problem, as I see it, is whoever has the majority, they're leading with their agenda, and they're not sort of trying in any way to come to the table and create solutions that are of top of mind. And so we just constantly get this pendulum swing where it goes back and forth. And again, I guess by design, politics are supposed to move slow. You're supposed to think about the stuff that goes on. And this is my last question on politics, because I feel like an idiot when I hear this, but from George W., Obama, Trump, Biden, the executive order has become this like stroke of a pen. We can change anything we want. And my understanding in my civics lessons was the three branches, the checks and balances, and the model of it has to go a certain way. What has gone on with executive orders in recent time, and how is that an okay thing?
So it's not clear that's an okay thing. Indeed, the Supreme Court has been beginning to weigh in on saying, is there overreach? It's partially the fault of Congress as well as the fault of the president. That is, if Congress decides that it can't resolve stuff itself without all this fighting in a very long period of time, it defers to the president to take action.
Got it.
And so it's not that they really want the president to just sort of write policy in a sort of quasi-dictatorial way. But since they can't do it, they defer, and the president has to do it. They keep thinking it's in the short term, but the short term is getting to be a long term now.
Got it.
And so this is where the Supreme Court, or the courts in general, are coming in, saying, they said two things. For a while, they were saying, presidents need to have authorization from Congress to be able to do this. You might just say, okay, it's up to the president. These are the boundaries. We got really wide boundaries that we give to the president. Find something in between. And that's the sort of way that in the sort of W. Bush era, and Clinton and Obama, that's what a lot was doing. And now they're not saying, we can't even agree on that these are the boundaries. They're way out here where you can't see my hands. And so now the court is saying, is adding to this that, there's no authorization. There's nothing, and so this is the final check on administrative presidential powers.
Got it. So we're in it. We're solving that problem for what is the first time, I guess. We're attempting to, or
you're attempting to, yes.
Attempting to put boundaries on it, I guess is the way we could say it. Interesting.
Right. Yeah. And it's not clear that it's necessarily the first time. There are in crises, the president has always taken greater powers, and certainly war powers, but everybody sort of like, well, okay, we understand that, once the war is over, we go back. Yeah. And we almost never do. You increase presidential power during the war, and then you go about halfway back.
Yeah.
And so that's ratcheted up. But then things like depressions and so forth, those also seem to require quick action to be able to ameliorate the problem. And that's found on Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. It's not found in the Capitol building.
Got it.
And so crises have generated this, and they haven't quite figured out a way to roll back to what would be a nice balance that both parties could agree to.
Got it. So it's, again, it always ends up back that the two parties are not agreeing on enough to come to a resolution, and nobody wants to side with the other side to say, yeah, I agree, that makes sense.
Right.
So the civil discourse, the requirement of Congress is failing across the board, essentially, where their job is to come and talk and negotiate and create positive solutions, and they're unwilling to do so on both sides. And so we have the result. It's kind of created itself.
Yeah. And even when it looks like McCarthy struck a deal with Biden about this year's budget, this coming year's budget. And then he couldn't get his own party to support it in the House.
Right.
Yeah.
The Senate seemed to be willing to agree to it or something real close to it. It looked like the House would. And indeed, if you put it on the floor in the House, it would probably pass. Lots of Democratic votes and some Republican votes would be enough to get a majority because it's so close.
Yeah.
But, even the party leaders can't control their parties, can't find something in common that keeps their party together.
Yeah. So when we talk about politics in general, right, and, a lot of division, without a doubt, even within households at Thanksgiving dinner, you see that happen. I saw an interview that you had, and you quoted Churchill's, "The democracy is the worst form of government, except for all others." And so when we start to talk about this divide and the way that our government is, I know there's a lot of people out there that feel like this is not the best. Is that right in kind of that quote, in that it is true? I mean, it has flaws, but is it better than other forms of government that exist?
Well, that's... So I would say first, that's always when Churchill was saying things like that was always in some bit of when the Labour Party and the Conservative Party could still come together.
Sure.
In Britain, in a way that they can't anymore either. They're not as bad as United States, but they're not too far away. I mean, they're being affected by some of the same things. So it may be that, the worst has gotten worse. And it's possible to make the argument that another system might work better. This is what Xi Jinping is arguing. I mean, he's not making the argument in a specific sense, but living it. Yeah. He's trying to come up with a system that serves the Chinese people. That's obviously not a democracy. It's about as far away from it as you can get.
Yeah.
And the thing that has attracted people to at least pay attention to see if they can understand what China's doing and would it work someplace else is because it's been, the success story of my lifetime. China has gone from just a horrible, terrible set of circumstances to,
money
leading. Yeah, they just made money. They were able to dig out of poverty. They were, it is remarkable. It's, hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty in one lifetime.
Yeah.
And really only in since the 80s, late 70s. It is a stunning thing. And so it's a fact that just sits there, and people are paying attention to that.
Yeah. So in classes, right, prospective student looking to get into political science, and how much discourse goes on in your classroom? How much conversation is there? And are we knowing that the problem is people can't communicate well enough to agree to it? Sometimes we agree to disagree, but sometimes we can move a little bit, right? If you're way here and I'm over here, well, that's a good point. I'm going to come in a little bit on that. Oh, that's a good point. And then we meet in the middle. How much of that are we teaching at the level of academia now? Here at Elite Collegiate Planning, we're able to send students to private schools for nearly a fraction of the cost of public schools. Visit our website, elitecollegiateplanning.com, to learn more.
So I don't know. So what I would say is that you need to set up a classroom of respect for each individual. That's the core. And the virtue of one of the virtues of a liberal arts education is that, sort of each person is understood as being able to ask the right questions. That's the sort of standard of it. And everybody can, if everybody can be accepted as being able to do that, then you have a chance of people with very different perspectives being able to at least listen to one another. Even if they don't actually come together, they can at least say, well, I can understand why they had that position. I disagree with it. And that's what you try. It's not, you can't always be successful at this.
Yeah.
But if the university as a whole, or the college, in some ways it's easier, a small college, because you have 1,200 instead, or 1,500 instead of
50,000 or 100,000.
Right. That the idea that everybody has something worth listening to, and their intellect deserves respect. And to do that, the person deserves respect, is the basis for going forward.
Could I then make the assumption, based on that the intellect in the house is not where it needs to be?
Yeah, it does not do a good imitation of a small liberal arts college.
Got it.
At all.
And that's interesting too, because I went to a small liberal arts college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called Franklin and Marshall. And
I've had some of my students teach there.
I had a fantastic experience. I mean, and I was in business classes, I was in philosophy classes, psychology classes, political science classes. And one of the cores of my education from 2001 to 2005 was we talked everything out. Discourse was promoted. We never got violent or mad at each other, or couldn't be friends with each other, or took our balls and went home. Like, we went in the class, we were given, the toss up. Here's the concept. What do you think? Argue your side versus, and it was point and counterpoint and point and counterpoint. And at the end of it, there was always some summary of the pros and the cons, and the valid versus the non-valid, and the things you throw away, and the things that, I'm willing to give that, because you know what? I'm not offended by it, or it's not something that I would dig my heels in and say no to. But there were things that we did that. And so I'm just constantly amazed that there isn't some way to get people to just talk intelligently. And this goes back to the intelligence, because intelligence should be respected and intelligence should be listened to. And if we have intelligent people that are leading the country in politics, then you would respect it. And so that's why I sort of made that it was a joke that, the intelligence isn't there. But I mean, if you go on that premise, we're not being emotionally and intelligent. We're not being intelligent at how we go about doing business in this country. And we're seeing a decline of civil discourse at every level, starting at the top. And then I go back to it and I say, isn't that then the concept that I was taught by my father very early in life was power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, we're seeing, and I never, for whatever reason, I never realized how much of the dirtiest game in the world politics really is. It's the hardest one to play. And it seems and we can talk about special interest groups and we can talk about the money, because I think you have to follow the money in all sequences. But I don't want to I want to jump off politics because I want to help the clients understand what the type of thing that you study when you come into political science, and how many, we talk about like engineering has had so many divergent majors where it used to be the big 5, and then it was, okay, there's 10. Now there's probably 35 different engineering majors that have spawned. Is political science much the same way?
So not so much, not as much as that.
Okay.
It isn't even near as varied. But I wanted to say one thing, and the engineering is actually a good indication of this. One of the ways in which, particularly like F&M for you and small liberal arts college Allegheny for me, was you encountered the same people in your political science classes, but you encountered them in English literature and history and philosophy and chemistry and biology. And you found out that they had strengths and everybody has different kinds of strengths, and everybody has strengths. And that helps, knowing that, seeing them in a diversity of settings sort of help smooth over you're such an idiot. How can you hold that position in politics, kind of position? In some ways that happens in political science at schools like Duke, because it's still small enough, and you're going to find people. It may not be, you may have entirely different people in your physics class than you do in your political science class, but you're going to find people in, classical Greek political philosophy course, as well as American politics, as well as, international relations and, war and peace issues. And you're going to see them in diverse settings. And that helps you see them as a wholer human being, and generates the possibility of respect. Let me just talk a little bit about political science. I mean, one of the great things about engineering is that it's the thing that is one of the fields that is adapting most to the dramatic transformations of our society. And that's why it's showing such a, generative of whole new approaches. In political science, it is embedded within the liberal arts tradition, and one of the key pieces, which keeps it focused on. We have a concentration that we call PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. And it's an obviously, by definition, it's an interdisciplinary thing. It has some technical, it has some philosophical, it has some, substantive politics, and those sorts of things. That's a very old tradition. PPE is a very old tradition that goes back to Oxford and Cambridge in, 1400 or something, way back. But it has revitalized, because political scientists want to know some economics, so be able to deal with the current world that they're going to be facing. It used to be that our primary placement of our students was in law school. And that, that sort of structured some of our major to keep it a strong channel, because that's where they wanted to go. And that was, but the number of people going to law school has reduced, and the number of people going if you're going to go to another school, it may be an MBA, it may be political science, but it may be in economics, it may be business, and so on. And so you have a much broader array of things you need to prepare your people for. So political science is becoming somewhat more interdisciplinary in and of itself.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And it sort of has to, if you step back and evaluate. So you made a comment that I want to blow up, that is beautiful, which is when you do something like the PPE, you're bringing multiple disciplines together, and you're forcing, in that moment, in that semester, in that year, you are forcing people to think and connect dots and think forward, think backwards, think left and right, to bring, conclusions and summaries. And one of the things that I've been disappointed with in the higher ed environment is when we stop teaching students how to think. The goal of the educator. And I read a quote the other day. It was about this education system, and I think it was Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was one of the founders of the education system as we know it. And he said it was designed for workers. Like he's trying to educate workers so that he has employees that he can hire. And so it's sort of structured into do what you're told, go through the process. But when you get to higher ed, man, it's about thinking. It's about expanding, because when you graduate college, and I'll say this to anyone, the next step is you better be a sponge to everything that's going on around you, because that's how you find success. It's not about what you learned in college and applying. It's about how you can take your ability to think in the moment and produce outcomes. So I love the liberal arts education. I think it is so misguided. People say it says liberal. Oh, I don't want my kid to get a liberal arts degree. And I'm like, you are missing the boat, because liberal arts is where you're taught to think without question.
Yes. Yeah.
That's my rant on liberal arts education. It's the best. So you made mention of the matriculation rate to next level institutions, which I think is a huge factor. And for a long time, political science meant you were going to law school, right? And so now you're starting to see this expansion of the people that come through Duke in your program specifically. How many are going on to the next chapter in education versus headed to the workforce, or and if you don't know the numbers exactly, shoot from the hip and give us an idea.
Yeah. I would say it's about a third that go directly to something else, public policy, get an MPP, Master of Public Policy, MPA, Master of Public Administration, MBA, Business Administration. I would say that it seems that there has been an increase in the number who take a year off, a gap year, and that means that some of them find out they're doing just what they want to do in that year. They find themselves in their year, and they don't necessarily continue on. But most of our students want to go get yet another degree. In some ways, to some extent, it's, look, Mom, Dad, I understand that your concerns about political science being a valueless degree, any other liberal arts degree being valueless, but I'm using it as a base to get to a degree that is of value. I think there's some of that happens in the social sciences, especially, as opposed to the sciences or engineering or something where there seems to be a more direct,
pathway or whatever,
remunerative pathway right out. But I think this is also just reflecting the changes in society as we at the kind of top end kind of places where everybody has an aspiration to get to. They may not make it, but everybody has an aspiration to get to. It's increasingly that you need 16 years of education and then something specific, and so a postgraduate degree has become increasingly valuable for there's a very large contingent of Duke students who want to get a job in Manhattan.
Yeah.
At Wall Street, and that sort of thing.
So it's interesting. It's interesting you talk about that kind of the desire to get that second degree, but also that gap year thing, because my intention coming out of F&M was to go to law school. My father's an attorney, and it was, that was sort of what I had laid out in my brain. When I got to that 16th year and I graduated, I was like, you know what? I need a break from formal education. I want to go and test my chops, test my mettle in business and see what I can do. And, I often battle secondarily it was primary law school. Then it was secondary. I was like, I could get an MBA, well, 2 years out of college, I started a company. And so I turn around and say, and still to this day, I don't have the credential of the MBA, and I battle with the credential of society's credential versus the 15 years of sweat, hard work, borrowing, lending, banking, marketing, and all the stuff that I had to learn along the way. And I go, like, my MBA is in this building right here. This is where I did it. And so I think there really is something to that. Like, go out and test it, because, and I'm not discrediting postgraduate degrees in any way, shape, or form. What I'm saying is when you're particularly at a liberal arts institution where you're taught to think, right, we need more thinkers, actors, and doers. And what I hate to see is overeducated and underproductive, right? And I'm not insinuating that any Duke student would ever be overeducated and underproductive, but it happens in society where you see it, and you're constantly going for that next degree because, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what the pressure is to do that, because they think that's the pathway to success, is my assumption. And the pathway to success is grit, hard work, determination, and stick to itness, I mean, in any way, shape, or form. So is it the pressure of the individual, the pressure of the society, or the thought that that's how you get there that causes it?
Yeah. I'm not sure I can say which one of those is more consequential. I do want to say that for 20 years, I also taught at UNC.
Oh.
So I have a shirt that has a light blue stripe and a darker blue stripe on right now.
Yeah. I was going to say that. How did everybody feel about that? That's a very conflicting environment.
Yeah. I've always admired UNC. It was a fantastic school for a very long time.
Yeah.
And is one of the public Ivies, as they call it. It still is, right? But they get the whole panoply of North Carolina, especially, but also everywhere. But particularly the North Carolinians coming from small towns, in the mountains, and so on and so forth. And so they get a whole panoply, and so you get a somewhat greater sense of what the specialized Duke environment is, not the whole environment. And there you get, their hope is they can make a connection that, for a number of students, a good number of students, their hope they can make a connection that can get them started in real life, which means bringing home a paycheck in some way or other.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to what you say about that. That applies to a lot of the people who presumably are listening to this will and are thinking about going, where to go to college. A lot of them will, be it'd be wonderful for them to have a great 4-year education and then get a quality job.
Yeah.
Speaking of that and choosing schools, I have to ask this question because I have many parents that come to us when we discuss politics and choosing a school, that the divide right now is real. Yeah. And that there are parents that feel that, and again, you hear it different places. College right now is indoctrination towards one side, and I don't want my kids to go to these schools. And we joke about, Dave said the liberal arts, and literally because the word liberal is in the title, right, that parents are, I'm not sending my child there. When we talk about this potential divide, And when students are in that position of finding the right school and visiting a campus, if that's something that is top of mind, number one, is it real? Do you see that there is a divide and that, hey, this might not be the right social fit? We always talk about finding the right school, the right social fit, academic fit, financial fit. Does the potential, I'll say, politics on campus, do you see that? Is that something that parents should be concerned about finding that social fit? Do you see that there's some places that might not be a comfortable fit because of how one person may feel or think about certain issues that have politics involved?
So, that's a really interesting and difficult question.
Sure.
And every school, the social makeup is really consequential here, even more than the so-called political makeup.
Sure.
But in the late 2000s, just before 2010, the Duke lacrosse team got into a situation that drew a lot of media attention, and it turned out it was false, and they were okay. But so the faculty decided that the faculty senate, which we call the academic council, needed to check this out, and so they assigned one person to sort of each of the teams, one faculty member to sort of oversee, are things going okay? Are there problems we can detect? For, one of the greatest moments of my professional career, I was assigned to the men's basketball team.
That's a good day
that's
there.
Nice day.
Yes, it was fantastic. It turned out it was 2010, 2009, 10, which was the year that the current coach, John Shire, was part of the team that won the national title. So I like to say to Coach Krzyzewski, you've been a fantastic coach. You did wonderful things, but I'm at 100% in terms of winning national titles. But the reason I was mentioning this is that this led me to be sitting behind the bench at games and so forth to oversee what's going on and what it's like to be a student in this context. And that means there were parents of these students around me. I won't mention who they were, but they would find out that I was a political science professor, and several of them said, "Are there any Republicans in your department?" Obviously is an opening to asking something similar to your question exactly. Sure. I could say honestly that at this point we were distributed not unlike the nation as a whole, not quite 50-50, but there were lots of, so the idea that and Duke is not unusual that way among the top schools, and that the idea that the social sciences and the literature and so forth are all, crazy left-wingers is really belies my experience. I can't speak for other people, but my experience, not just at Duke, but also among my friends, Stanford and, so forth and so on. And the second thing is, even if the particular department happens to have an unusually large proportion of liberals, they interact across. This is pick Stanford because I happen to know that fairly well. One of my Allegheny fraternity brothers actually is a professor of political science at Stanford. So I really know. So it turns out, but they interact with the business school, with the Hoover Institute, and so on. In addition to the communications and the places that typically have more, and so the faculty interact quite often in a more diverse setting than it looks like.
Got it.
And that's got to affect how they present themselves in their classroom.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good answer. The story is awesome as well. So, for the student, do you see anything that is common between a successful in between successful political science students? Like, the interests that they may have coming in, what they're doing in high school. Is there a commonality that would say, hey, that you should check out political science?
This is going to sound sort of odd, but the students who are interested in math and science make some of the strongest majors that we have. It so happened North Carolina is distinctive. It's not unique, I don't think, in having a statewide school of science and math, and it's happens to be in Durham, just off campus. They have one in the arts, which is in Greensboro. But so that school it's required of every person before they graduate from that high school that they spend time with some faculty member at Duke, UNC, NC Central. And I have picked, I was fortunate for a good number of years, was able to have students who were interested in science and discovered they had an interest also in social science. And so ended up working with me. And they were some of the greatest students that I've encountered in college. I used it as a recruit. Don't tell anybody, but I used it as a recruiting device, and would contact the admissions committee and say, "This is a really good one. Here's another really good one." And they would pick. I had developed enough of a track record that they took that seriously, and we were able to recruit a number of them. And they're fantastic students.
And that's something I wouldn't have clicked for me, but can make sense when you start to think about it. And one of the questions I always like to ask when we deal with somebody in a specific major or field of study is there's always fallacies around a specific area where people will, a child will say to their parents, I want to study political science. And immediately the parents think, well, it's that one thing. Okay, what, you want to become president? Like, it's not going to happen.
Right.
What are some of the biggest things that I'll say, whether you as a professor, schools have to overcome as far as like a myth around political science that families should know?
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, so if I were advising families, I would try to get them to convince the kid to not think that they want to major in X as a high school kid. I would want them to say, and fortunately, Duke and many other liberal arts schools set this up so that, I think you may actually be barred from actually declaring a major until you're a sophomore. So that you can experience something broader than you have. And you could also see, just like the PPE program gives a bunch of economics undergraduates move over into political science when they discover what it's really like. On the one hand, they discover there's a real practical economics base, and it's really good to get the sort of mathematical training to understand it, but they don't find it very interesting substantively. And they find political science interesting substantively, and then they discover there's a way that they can also use those skills. So I would be telling these people, try to convince your students to come in with an open, unformed, career objective mind. It's okay to think, oh, sure, I would like to be, a Wall Street lawyer or whatever it might be. But there's many paths through the next 4 years, especially before you have to make a commitment to anything. And I would really encourage that and try to keep it as open as possible. I know it's a very difficult time to convince 16 and 17-year-olds. Oh yeah, don't be such a smart ass. Oh no. But I know it's difficult, but if I could just sort of, wave a magic wand, I would want students to come in, and they, not only me, but this other fellow at Stanford. Neither one of us came in, and among other, a whole bunch of us had no interest in politics growing up.
Yep.
Totally uninterested.
Mm-hmm.
I got to Allegheny College, and it turned out that it had a really good political science department, and I was attracted to the faculty because they're smart, right, and interesting. And even though they did political science, it was still interesting, right? And it sort of came in that way, and that's a much better route to deciding how you're going to, target yourself for where you want to go afterwards. And even then, don't make a formal commitment. Don't say, "Oh, okay, I've got to get to Harvard Law, or I'm just not going to be. I'm going to be a failure." Yeah.
Well, that's a tough pill for parents to swallow right now with some of the price tags.
Sure.
Where they're and that's the biggest pushback I see. And the parents are like, no, you got to choose, because you're not going for 5 years, and I'm not paying for you to go, whimsically learn about some things. And
Right.
I will make the comment right now and stand my ground as hard as I possibly can. When I got to F&M, I was not allowed to choose. I was not allowed to declare the major until second semester sophomore year. I was allowed to pursue all the intro classes I wanted. I was forced to take different they call them foundational classes, where you have to, one of them was called Why Do We Speak? And people were like, well, why would you learn that? Because that class in itself taught me how to think. It taught me how to think critically about things I know nothing about, to use logic, reason, perspective, to use different lenses, to really observe what's going on and create those outcomes. And so, parents, the pressure that the parent puts on the student to declare a major, you need to be business, you need to be engineering. I think this also stems from a lot of the foreign students that have come over a period of time. And in a sense, really, the chemical boom in the 70s and 80s, where we were pulling a lot of Chinese, a lot of Asian people too. It was, that sort of program to get here was, you need to be very strong in this particular subject matter, and this is the pathway. And, we still joke about it now. I have some Indian clients, and the joke with the Indian clients is they come to me and say the joke is always, you either got to be a doctor or an engineer. Like, those are your two options. And, that's fine. You can go be a doctor and engineer, but make sure life's a lot harder when your profession is something that you don't enjoy. Right.
Yeah.
I will also make one last comment. There's an expression out there that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And that is bogus. Work is work. Sometimes work is really good. Sometimes work is really hard. I think if you enjoy what you do, you find more satisfaction out of it. Not necessarily that you don't work. Right. All right.
Love the answer, by the way.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, we're about out of time. So this has been awesome. And I would love to interview your friend at Stanford. If you could connect us, that would be amazing, because I'd love to see. And again, getting a reiterative of the same type of stuff, I think, is very valuable for people, and to hear it from different institutions is awesome too. So I'd love a connection if you can make it happen. But this interview was fantastic. I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of it. And so thank you very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. This has been College Knowledge with the Pfizer Pratt University Professor of Political Science at Duke University, Mr. John Aldrich. Thanks again. Thank you guys for being a part of College Knowledge. If you or anyone you know is confused or worried about planning and paying for college, please visit us at elitecollegiateplanning.com and book a free consultation. Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kozak and Joe Kerins. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.